Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the Young Scientists Association of National Institute of Fundamental Studies, NIFS-YSA. This is the first webinar of the pre-conference webinar series, which is organized parallel to the Young Scientists Conference on Multidisciplinary Research, YSCMR 2022, which will be held on 10th of November 2022. YSCMR is a virtual international research conference organized by NIFS-YSA. More importantly, we are happy to inform you that call for abstract submissions have been opened, and we encourage all graduates and undergraduates to submit their abstracts and extended abstracts. And for more information, please visit our conference webpage, and you can follow the link which is displayed in the chat box. This pre-conference webinar is entitled as How to Write an Extended Abstract. And please note that the webinar will be recorded. You can ask questions regarding the webinar at the end or type it in the chat box. Today's webinar will be conducted by Professor Mohammed Cassim Iqbal. Professor Iqbal is a retired Associate Research Professor in the Plant and Environmental Science Department at NIFS. He conducted research in the plant tissue culture and environmental remediation. He also a member of the Board of Study for Crop Science of the PGIA, University of Peradeniya, and former member of the Board of Governors at the NIFS. Now, I would like to invite Professor Mohammed Cassim Iqbal to commence the webinar.
Welcome to the first in a series of presentations organized by the Young Scientists Association of the NIFS to help you prepare for the forthcoming conference on multidisciplinary research. These talks have in mind graduate students as well as undergraduate students in their early stages of conducting research. In this presentation, we shall look at how to write an abstract in general and also an extended abstract, which is required by the conference organizers this year. So this is the layout of a journal paper, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. We shall discuss the title of the paper later, and the title is usually followed by the authors, and then the affiliations, and then the abstract. And below the abstract is a set of keywords. Again, we shall see how to write out or choose the keywords later on in this presentation. So what is a good abstract, which we all aspire to write? An abstract should be the least specialized section of the paper. This is because it is not only scientists who might have a look at, who might read the abstract, but also lay people. And the purpose of the abstract is to educate anybody on what has been done by you. So any scientist, or for that matter, a lay person who reads the abstract should be able to grasp what was done, why was it done, how was it done, what is the outcome, and what does all this mean. So that is a challenging job to be done in a very limited number of words. So why is the abstract important? Because we first read the title of a conference or a journal paper. If it is interesting and something that can be understood, we then move on to read the abstract. Reviewers of journals and conference papers first read the title and then the abstract, and then decide if it is appropriate for their journal or conference. Abstracts are freely available, be they subscription journals or open access journals. And obviously, if the abstract is not clear and interesting, the subsequent details in your paper will not be read. We also read the abstract to decide if the full paper is to be read, particularly in the journal, and also if reading the abstract is going to help our research and also add to our knowledge base. For the specialist, that is those who are conducting similar research to what you have done, it provides details on new methods, results, and interpretations. So let's look at a few types of abstracts that are available. In the past, abstracts in journals were usually unstructured but contain the elements of a good abstract. So when I say unstructured, what I mean is it was usually a single paragraph of up to about 200 to 300 words. Later on, some journals introduced the structured abstract. This contains the important elements that should be addressed in a good abstract. This ensures that all the relevant information is presented to convey a holistic picture of what was done. These are shown on the slide. First comes the background, context, or purpose of the study that you have done, followed by the methods, and then the results, findings, or outcome of your research, and finally the conclusion. And of course, the last sentence could be a recommendation or a perspective on what further work needs to be done. The extended abstract is a mini paper of 2 to 4 pages. And usually the reference is limited to about 4 or 6 at the most. The conference abstract can be longer for up to 500 words, and it is usually standalone. So now we come back to the title and how this should be formulated so that it is attractive. The title is the most visible part of the paper. So thus it should be very general and conceptual. It is also an opportunity to attract the reader's attention to what you have done and should clearly communicate the message in your study. Thus, it should not be boring, nor not contain unfamiliar abbreviations or be long. You should ideally avoid names of organisms, particularly in the life sciences, where possible, or reference to a specific geographic region, because this would convey to the reviewers what you have done is applicable to a very restricted region, and it is, in other words, not global. However, in certain localized studies, this may not always be possible. A word of caution is necessary when formulating the title. You should keep the best title possible for your future ultimate journal article, and restrict your title for the conference papers to the study that was done for the conference. For example, if at the end of your thesis you plan to submit your work to a journal paper, you would describe everything or most of what you did in the manuscript. But for a conference, you should pick out at the most one or two important outcomes from your study which you wish to present for discussion at a conference. And therefore, you should restrict your title to these few things that you intend to present. So let's look at the purpose of the abstract. The purpose of the abstract is to convey in less than 500 words what you did, why you did that, what was the outcome to the person who is reading it. This is a formidable task. Please do not cut and paste from various parts of your thesis or research paper to make an abstract. That would be a very shoddy job and also recognized by the reviewers. A lot of thought should be given to the abstract. It should tell a very short story of why your research is important. And later we shall look at a sample abstract to illustrate how this should be done. There are a few things that you should not include in the abstract. Obviously, what you did not do should not be in the study or manuscript. Abstracts usually do not contain citations, figures, equations, or tables. You may also exclude details and background information. If there are any abbreviations, define them, but ideally avoid including abbreviations. There are, of course, common abbreviations which can be used. For example, DNA, UV, or pH are some examples. Do not define key terms. This can be done in the introduction of your paper or your presentation. There should be no subjective quantifications. Example, many, few, wide, variety, etc. And also no subjective adjectives. For example, that your work was innovative, interesting, fundamental, because what is innovative or interesting to you may not be to the person who is reading it. Just now come to the keywords which we referred to earlier and the importance of the keywords. Keywords are important to locate and abstract by search engines such as Google, Google Scholar, etc. and therefore to be cited in other work. In the life sciences, you may include the species names under keywords and other important words that occur in the paper, which is important to locate a paper by someone else. Carefully select these because this decides if your paper would be captured by a search engine. A simple trick to do is use a few keywords and see if a paper that includes these keywords comes out in the search. It could be your paper. Structuring the abstract. Now, it is important that the abstract is structured so that the key elements of what the abstract should contain are included. Initially, state the context of what you did. This means state the background of the problem and what is known about the problem in 1 or 2 sentences. What was your motivation to undertake this study? Why is it important? What impact would your study have if it turns out to be successful? Were there any difficulties? And are you using indirect means to acquire the data? So these are things that can form the context of your study. But what is important is this context should be written within 1 or 2 sentences. After the context, write the need for the study. What is already known about the study and what needs to be known. This is, of course, the objective of your study. So when you undertake a study, you're obviously going to look at some aspect that has not been done, which forms the hypothesis that you're going to test in your experiments. After writing the need for the study, we come to the methods. Again, the methods should be brief. You don't have to go into details. Briefly mention how it was done, whether you used any models, experimental data, or field data, or whether you acquired the data by indirect means, what is called a proxy data, and what were the variables that you controlled, what you measured, or what you ignored. These should be mentioned under the methods so that the person reading it has a clear idea of what was done and what was not done. And then, of course, the most important aspect of the abstract are the results. Give the results in numbers, objective numbers, but don't use adjectives to describe something like very, small, significant. If you at all use the word significant, it should go along with statistical tests that you have done. The reader wishes to know what was found. Include only one or two major findings from your entire work. And as I said earlier, not the entire thesis or project that you undertook. Finally, write the conclusions, which is where you express what your findings mean. You must interpret your findings to the person who is reading it. And then, what are the implications from your findings? And state whether these results can be generalized or is it very specific to a particular case. Finally, as a last sentence, state the future or perspectives implied from the findings of your studies for future studies. For example, there might be something that has been left out or that needs more detailed study in the future. With that, we now come to the extended abstract. An abstract alone is insufficient material for the reviewers to decide on the significance of the study to be accepted for presentation. The extended abstract provides more material, but not as detailed as in a full paper. So this can go up to a few pages, usually up to 4, where you can describe in the introduction and make the case why you undertook this study, what is its significance, importance. You can also describe your methods a little more in detail, and then, of course, concentrate on the outcome of the study, that is your results. It is also an opportunity to formulate your thoughts towards a formal publication and get feedback from the reviewers. Because eventually your ultimate target is to produce a manuscript so that your work is finally found in a journal publication. The focus of the extended abstract is only on your work that you are presenting at the conference. You can eliminate much of the background literature. and of course see the conference guidelines for limits on the number of words, etc. Briefly, let us look at the style and the tense to be used in an abstract. Some journals or conferences prefer the active form of writing. This is where the subject is very clearly identified. For example, if you look at the sentence, the hunter killed the lion, or you can be more specific, say, I killed the lion. But a passive way of indicating the same sentence is the lion was killed by the hunter. To be obvious to you that the passive form needs more words than the active form. So ideally the active form is preferred. You should be careful with the tense that you use. If you are referring to established knowledge, that is what is already known or established by other findings by other authors, you can write as we show, for example, in the present simple. Your own contribution should be in the past simple, which is we showed. Any background information and your results should be in the present perfect. We have found, we have demonstrated, etc. So these are briefly style and tense as to how we write the abstract. With that, we finally come to look at a sample abstract and see how these elements that we identified earlier in the structured abstract are manifested in this abstract published in the journal Nature quite some time back. The article was about the decline in phytoplanktons in the past century. This is, of course, associated with global warming and therefore climate change, and hence the importance of this study. So let us look at how the authors set out the context for this study. In the oceans, ubiquitous, which means everywhere, microscopic photoautotrophs or phytoplanktons account for approximately half the production of organic matter on Earth, thus affecting the abundance and diversity of marine organisms and strongly influencing climate process. So for the non-biologists, photoautotrophs are tiny organisms which have chlorophyll, like the green leaves on plants that you see, and with this chlorophyll, these organisms can synthesize simple sugars and carbohydrates, or in other words, fix carbon dioxide into these simple sugars using the energy from light. So what the context says is that approximately half the production of organic matter on Earth is done by these microscopic organisms. The other half, of course, is done by all these massive trees and plants that you see around on the terrestrial Earth. So obviously, any changes in these microorganisms in the sea can affect the fixing of carbon dioxide, and also, more importantly, the diversity of other marine organisms in the ocean, because these phytoplanktons are right at the bottom of the food chain, and there are other organisms going right up to the big whales which feed on these microscopic organisms. So that is the context or background for this work. The need for this study. Why was it necessary to do this study? Because analysis of satellite-derived phytoplankton concentrations in the sea are only available since 1979. Simply because that was the time when satellites were discovered. And with this data, you can only work out fluctuations in decadal scales, that is every 10 years, linked to climate forcing. But this length of record is insufficient to resolve longer-term trends. So the authors want to see the trends, and to see the trends, you need to have a large data set. But unfortunately, the data that we have is only from 1979, which means at the time of their publication, it was only about 3 decades. But they were interested in looking at previous decades and how phytoplankton concentrations would have changed. So that is what they wanted to know, to estimate the time dependence of phytoplankton biomass since the beginning of oceanographic measurements in 1899. So since 1899, there were other measurements done in the oceans which could indirectly indicate the phytoplankton biomass in the seas. So what they did was, their task or method, they combined the available ocean data and in situ chlorophyll observations. So with that, they were actually using a proxy method to look at how the phytoplankton biomass changed over time since 1899. This paper presents the trends we identified at local, regional, and global scales. They observed declines in 8 out of 10 ocean regions and estimate a global rate of decline of approximately 1% of the phytoplankton biomass over time. The analysis also revealed interannual, that is within the year, to within the decade changes in phytoplankton, which could be superimposed from long-term trends. So these fluctuations are strongly correlated with basin scale climate indices, whereas long-term declining trends are related to increasing sea surface temperatures. So in other words, global warming was increasing the sea surface temperature, which in turn was leading to a decline in the phytoplankton biomass. Therefore, the authors from this study concluded that the global phytoplankton concentration has declined over the past century. So this decline will need to be considered in future studies of marine ecosystems, geochemical recycling, ocean circulation, and fisheries. So this was a study that looked at the changes in phytoplankton using indirect means because satellite data was not available. They looked at data which showed them the penetration of light through the oceans, and from this they estimated that there was a decline in the phytoplankton concentration. Hence, this study was important globally, and which is why it could be published in the journal Nature. So finally, from what we have seen in the last few minutes, in the last nearly 30 minutes, a good abstract should fascinate and interest you. Therefore, you should write and rewrite until it is perfect as possible. Observe the rules given by the conference organizers. given above. And the structure that we have shown earlier in this presentation is to help you write a good abstract. So with that, I finally come to my last slide, which is the cover of a interesting small booklet written by these two authors, William Strunk and E.B. White, on the elements of English style. This was written a very long time ago. If you Google for this on the web, you can download the PDF version. It's a very small booklet. If I remember right, it's about 50 or 60 pages. And what you should do is you should regularly consult this booklet, not only for this conference, but also right throughout your graduate studies. So that brings us to the end of this short presentation. And if you have questions, you may either ask them now or include them in the chat box. And I shall attempt to answer these questions. Thank you so much for your attention in the last 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And before starting the Q&A session, I should apologize for the technical issues that occurred at the beginning. And this is the first webinar of the pre-conference webinar series, which is organized parallel to the Young Scientist Conference on Multidisciplinary Research, YSCMR, which is scheduled to be held on 10th of November 2022. So we can now move to the Q&A session. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask the questions directly, or you can put the questions in the chat box.
Fine, I think I can see one or two questions. Let me take up the first one. It's from Malsha Samarasari. Her question is, when we are going towards a formal publication through an extended abstract, any tips to avoid self-plagiarism? Well, I assume that what you mean is that what you have mentioned in the extended abstract, if you mention it also in your formal publication, whether that would be considered as plagiarism. I don't think so, because the abstract for a conference would not be regarded as plagiarism. You would always cite that this in your citations that you presented your paper earlier, and of course it's a very simple thing to avoid self-plagiarism. You know, all you have to do is look at the sentence and reformulate it, and that will take care of plagiarism. Plagiarism is actually where you copy somebody else's ideas, their concept, word to word, without acknowledging into your paper. So as far as you don't do that, it would not be regarded as plagiarism. I hope I answered your question, but you can come back to me again. Let me see the next question. Also, I think from the same person. And also any tips to decide what content of research should be included in the extended abstract, and then to effectively select remaining content for the later full paper. Yeah, so I think I have indirectly answered this during the presentation. For example, I would like to emphasize this again, since you all are at the beginning of your careers in research. Once you have submitted your thesis, or even while you're towards the end of your thesis, you're going to publish your results. And there will be a big paper, which will include the important results. But on the path towards this at the beginning of your research career, you would have also addressed some other issues in your research. So what I would suggest is you should pick out just one or two things in your research which you would like to present, and also hear the views of the others on these aspects. It will be criticized, obviously, that's fine, but that is what you want to get. So present just one or two from your main research project, not your entire thesis. And that will also enable you to have a title that will not be in conflict with your major title for the final submitted paper. I think I also referred to this during the presentation. So if you go back to the presentation, you will see this also. Right, with that, the next one is from Sanuri Etiarachi. When we write an extended abstract, we have to conclude all the selected findings within 2 or 3 pages. How do we summarize that without damaging the flow of the extended abstract? Yeah, so again, my previous answer to this, you should not use all your findings. Just take 1 or 2 findings. There'll be another conference coming up. You also want to have another, submit another paper. So you don't put all your findings, all your eggs into one basket. Just pick out just 1 or 2 and then concentrate on this. So, and that will be enough, there'll be enough space for you to write up this extended abstract. So when you start your research career, always, you don't want to end up only with 1 conference paper and 1 major paper. You have to map out your path so that you will have at least a few abstracts. And the important thing is abstracts in conferences, and the important thing is these should be with different titles. And of course, and also it should be a little different from what is going to be your major publication. Of course, there might not be 1 major publication, there might be a few publications. So always keep that in mind, because this happened to me when I was doing my project. One of my students, I found he had submitted after some time the same paper with the same title. So obviously this is not a good thing. And then of course I had to advise him that not to include both these in his CV, because somebody looking at the CV will find 2 papers with the same title presented at different conferences, which is obviously not a nice thing to do. Okay. Is it advisable to, this is from Jayani Kalinga, is it advisable to include graphs, tables in the results section of an extended abstract? That is the purpose of the extended abstract. You should include 1 or 2 tables and 1 or 2 graphs, so that the reviewer can come to a better judgment than if you submit only the abstract. So to be very frank, last year when I was the editor of this conference, we came across the problem that the abstract alone was not sufficient for us to come to a conclusion. So therefore we decided, and that has been implemented this year. I should thank the YSA conference organizers to submit an extended abstract. I'm not sure whether this extended abstract is going to be published or not. That is a decision to be taken by the conference organizers. Perhaps they can answer this later on. So this is mainly also to help the reviewers to come to a decision of what you have done. Right, with that, thank you. I would like to know the advantage of writing future work in the publication, Madhara. I would like to know the advantage of writing future. Well, obviously the advantage is that you will have a better CV, in the sense you will have a CV with many publications, and that is what is going to convince your future employer or wherever you are applying, either for scholarship, etc., to have many papers and with diversity. So therefore, it is advantageous to write other papers also. I'm not sure, Madhura, whether I got your question correctly, and that is my answer, but of course you can ask your question again, so I can come back to you. at the moment, those are the questions that are here. In addition, let me just point out a few things that I would like to pay attention when you're writing the abstract. The abstract should be quite clean. And when I say clean, what this means is there should be no spelling mistakes. The grammar should be good. There should be the full stops in the correct places, the commas in the correct places, spacings between words, spacings, for example, even between the units. So for example, let's say you say 5 grams. There should be a space between the 5 and the G. So many people omit this. And a few journals, of course, will accept this, but the convention is that there should be a space between the unit and the quantity. So these are small things that will irritate the reviewer and could lead to a bad review. So try to avoid all these small things. And how can you avoid these small things? Because English is not our first language. Well, one suggestion I can make is there is a software called Grammarly. You can Google. Of course, you have to pay for this. And paying in dollars is not an option these days. So what you can do is, I think they give a option where they will correct your grammar for a small paragraph or something like that. So you can always log into this, cut and paste your abstract into it, and they will correct most of the things, not everything, and that should give you quite a good abstract that you can send back. Or of course, you give it to somebody else, some of your senior supervisor will definitely look at it and get it correct, because an abstract with that needs to be corrected is a bit of an irritation for the reviewer. There are 3 more messages. Let's look at that before I have a few more comments I would like to share with you. So when you are writing an extended abstract, do we write as one paragraph or can we write more paragraphs? Yeah, that's again a good question. Yes, of course, you must have many paragraphs. What is a paragraph? A paragraph is something which has only one idea. So if there are many ideas, you should not put everything into one paragraph. Sciences, for example, I'm reading a book, and then actually when I was reading this, the book is not on science, it's on something else. It's on, I think, literature. I found for at least 2 pages, there were no paragraphs. But then the person was writing on the same topic right throughout this. And what is a paragraph composed of? A paragraph is composed of sentences. So in each paragraph has an idea, and the first sentence of this paragraph should be that idea, very clearly given. Then the next 2 or 3 sentences, you can explain this idea and back it up with maybe what others have done, or also with your own justifications as to what it means. The final sentence again in this paragraph should summarize or reinforce what you said first. So that's a simple formula to write a good paragraph. Then you get on to the next idea. So which means before you start writing, jot down the different ideas you have so that you can formulate your extended abstract. Okay. Now I think the number of messages are increasing, so I may have to cut down my talking. Let me see. Some of these are compliments for which I thank you all. Let me see for the questions. Is there any limit for the number of authors in an abstract publication? Yes, there is a limit. I believe you're asking, the question is there any limit for the number of authors in an extended abstract publication? Yes, I think again the conference organizers will send this out to you. Usually the limit is around 5 or 6 authors. Because as I told you in the extended abstract, you don't have to discuss what others have done. for example, in the introduction, you don't have to write an extensive introduction or literature review that you will have in a formal paper. So therefore, you can cut down on the authors and just have the authors what are necessary, for example, to back up your concept of the paper. Maybe there might be some citations for the methodology and then for the discussion. So don't have more than about 5 or 6 or 7 authors for the extended abstract. Okay, Shani says thank you. Also says thank you. Oh, there are lots of thank yous. But let's see the questions. Hironi Abesirivardhana has said, so can we do citation for an extended abstract? Well, if it is published in a journal, I'm sorry, if it is published in a conference proceeding, you can. You can always cite something that can be located. So if somebody has, if it is cited somewhere, which can be referred to, you can cite it. Okay. When we are, okay, this is from Bhagya Vikram Surya. And by the way, thank you for all of you all for saying all the nice things about me. I'll thank you all again at the end of this, but let's have the questions. When we are including the abbreviations in the abstract, do we need to give the extended meaning of those abbreviations within the abstract itself? Or else can we just mention the abbreviations in abstract and then mention the long version in the introduction or any other sections in the extended abstract? Again, my strong advice is not to include abbreviations in the abstract. If you do, you only have to have abbreviations if that fact is going to be repeated many times. If you're going to repeat it only once, I wouldn't abbreviate it. You can do that in the major paper. So don't abbreviate unnecessarily, because unless it is a very common abbreviation, it is again going to irritate the reviewer, and don't irritate the reviewers, because the reviewer is like a small god till you get your abstract published. Okay, I think the conference organizers are given a website for the conference details. And I just have maybe 1 or 2 other things that I would like to share with you. Yes, don't cut and paste from your project or your thesis writing and try to make an abstract. That is the worst way of writing an abstract. So always follow the method that I have outlined here. You can get the ideas from what you have already written in your thesis, but don't cut and paste, because that is not a good idea. In fact, that's a bad habit to get used to. Another tip that I can give you, what the reviewers do is, they will type your title into Google. This is the first thing that they do. And once you do this, the Google will tell you, Google is highly intelligent. Google will tell you whether this has been published earlier, either by you or by somebody else. So therefore, don't be very careful when you write out the title. Don't plagiarize the title from somebody else, or don't use the title yourself again. Because last year we found there were a few cases where we found the titles had been copied from somebody else. Even the entire abstract in different parts had been copied word to word from elsewhere. And of course, the reviewers caught this very easily. When you ask Google, Google will tell you. And then we had to reject these papers. So please be very careful on that. Yeah, so the other things I've already covered. Don't write your entire project or thesis into the abstract. Just pick out 1 or 2, and please remember that there are other conferences coming up. And also, of course, pick up good conferences where you would like to present your paper. It might be a national conference, or it might be an international conference. So pick out the conference, map out your progress right at the beginning of the year, where you would like to present, and then of course you will have a good CV at the end of your journey. One more thing, the conference organizers will ask you whether you want to present this orally or as a poster. And can I ask the conference organizers whether this is going to be a virtual event or a live event? Can somebody tell me?
That's going to be a virtual event.
Okay, thank you. Right, so it's going to be a virtual event like last year. So if it's a virtual event, I think this question doesn't come up much, whether you want to do it orally or post, because orally you can always practice and then record it and send it to them. The problem comes when you have to orally talk in front of an audience. That is a very challenging thing if you have not done it earlier. But of course, you must take up this challenge and do it, because one day you have to get over this if you are looking at a scientific career. In fact, to share something with you, I still remember while I was doing my PhD, we went for my supervisor. I was in Germany at that time, so he actually got a lot. He was quite a rich supervisor in the sense he got a lot of grants. He actually took us to an international conference in Canada, and I had to do an oral presentation. And those days, this was perhaps when we all were not born. This was in the 90s. Yes, this was in the 90s. There were no PowerPoint slides to be prepared. You had to prepare these slides with some chemical process, like developing a film in the old days, so that you get this blue and white thing. And with these slides, you put it into a slide projector and play it out. And so, which means you don't have any way of changing things once you have made the slides. And I could not sleep the previous night because I had to do this presentation the next day. And I don't think whether I can't remember whether I had a good breakfast. So it's such a, I know how challenging it is to speak in front of an audience. But a virtual conference, which was not heard of those days, there was no corona or for that matter anything. Makes life much easier. You can record it yourself, you can replay it, you can redo it. So I always encourage you to do the oral presentation. But on the other hand, a poster also has its advantages. The advantage of the poster is that people have time to look at the poster and ask you questions. Whereas the oral presentation is, well, if I may say, it's forgotten after you have spoken the words. But the poster is always there where you can one-to-one discuss things with the audience. So those are the plus and minuses of these two things. And those are the things that I have to tell you. I don't want to take too much of your time for this Saturday afternoon, but are there any questions to clarify what I said? I'm not sure whether I was very clear in everything what I told you. And whether I answered all the questions. Is everybody happy? Can the host confirm that everything was answered? YSA?
Sorry for interruption. So this year also we are expecting speed talks instead of posters.
Right. So that's also very interesting. Speed talks, which means instead of the posters, you can do a very small presentation, and that is more challenging. So, but of course, you can practice this so that way and be comfortable at the end of it. Right. So I think I would like to thank all of you all who thought of hanging out till the end of it, and also for your interesting questions. I also wish you all a lot of good luck with writing your abstracts. I hope this was quite useful and cleared up a few things for many of you all. If you still have any questions, my email was right at the top of on the first slide. You're welcome to write to me. I am I am retired from my work at the IFS, so which means I have more time on my hands. I'll be only too happy to help you all out. And yeah, and thank you for all the kind sentiments that you all have expressed by many of you. Okay, so that's from my side. That's all I have to say. I will leave it to the organizers to wrap it up. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to express my sincere thankfulness to Professor Iqbal on behalf of the audience for your interesting and informative presentation today. And we are truly grateful for spending your valuable time in shaping our research development. And I hope you all had a fruitful evening today. And many thanks to you all for your participation, which made this event a success. And I must apologize for all the inconvenience you faced because of the technical issues. And keep in touch with our Facebook page and YSCMR web page for more information about our upcoming webinars. And more importantly, I would like to remind you to send your abstracts and extended abstracts to YSCMR 2022. And please note that the extended abstracts will not be published in our conference proceedings, and it will be used only for the reviewing process. And for more information, please follow the link that appeared in the chat box. So we can wind up the session now. And thank you once again and have a nice evening.